Will bring you the top stories from across the region over the past few weeks. The chief of Eabametoong is vowing to fast-track the construction of a new school following the devastating fire that destroyed the John C. Yesno Education Center on January 25th. Chief Solomon at Lucan says they're making plans for online learning and a temporary facility for the 299 students, but he insists a new school needs to be built as soon as possible. Jonathan Wilson reports.
To rebuild the school. There's no excuse of not having to do that because every child has a right to go to school regardless what happens.
Eabametoong Chief Saul Atlukin says his community has been coming together to cope following the major fire that burned their only school to the ground.
They're just shocked, devastated, the school's gone, up in flames. But that, even the kids, were crying. A few of the kids were crying that morning when they found out that they lost the school.
2 boys, aged 17 and 14, were taken into police custody on Thursday with arson charges pending.
But when I did hear that it could be arson, it was unbelievable. I couldn't believe that could happen. My initial reaction, just like anybody else, would, I guess, anger. Why would they do it? Why would somebody do that? But after a while, thinking about it, I can't approach it that way.
Instead, Atlukin says he has to focus on helping the 299 kindergarten to grade 9 students salvage their school year. They're planning for virtual learning to begin soon and finding a temporary facility to house at least some of the students and teachers.
We're also already submitted some proposals for a temporary solution in housing our students where they can go to school temporarily.
And they're working with Matawa and Indigenous Services Canada to fast-track construction of a new school, which has been bogged down in the planning and funding stages since 2019.
And we want to move fast on it. It's something that needs to take place immediately, moving forward for planning for a new school. And we all know federal government has the fiduciary responsibility for education of our Indigenous kids. And that should be their priority and goal, and that should happen immediately.
Jonathan Wilson, TBT News.
1 week later, Indigenous Affairs Minister Patty Hajdu confirmed that Eabametoong would get some much-needed funding in the wake of that devastating fire. Hajdu announced that her government has approved more than $3 million to help the community. The First Nation hopes to have a temporary school set up by September, but in the meantime, there are roughly 300 students left without a physical classroom. In a statement to TBT News, Hajdu affirmed her commitment to helping the students continue to learn in the immediate term. The funding will go to educational resources, to hire more teachers, and mental health services for the students. Hajdu says the funding confirms to the people of Eabametoong that the government is there to support the education in that community. Hajdu adds the Liberals will be at the community's side as they work to build a new school. Ontario NDP leader Marit Stiles is sending a strong message to the Ford government that the Terrace Bay pulp mill needs to be reopened, and soon. Stiles toured the North Shore last month, stopping in Nipigon and Scriber, but her main focus was at a meeting with community members and stakeholders in Terrace Bay to discuss the fate of the mill there. Lee Noonan reports.
The head of Ontario's official opposition will be heading back to Toronto with a sense of urgency when it comes to the Terrace Bay pulp mill. NDP leader Marit Stiles joined Superior North MPP Lise Vaugeois to meet with key stakeholders from in and around Terrace Bay. She says her biggest takeaways were the risks that come with letting the temporary shutdown drag on.
We have to do something, and we have to do it quickly. The government has to step in. We need to know whether this is really an issue of the company wanting to sell off, or if they're really looking at what do they need to get going again, because this mill cannot close.
Stiles said her goal in Terrace Bay was to listen and gather information from locals on how to best help the community after AV Terrace Bay idled the mill, announcing the layoffs of 400 workers. Local union president Stephen Downey represents about 300 mill workers, most of whom were laid off. If that sense of urgency is all Stiles takes back to Queen's Park, he says he'll be satisfied.
Yes, the faster the better. If we lose any more people, it's going to be very hard to manage this place to run it.
Downey says many workers have already found work elsewhere, and any delays will see more people leave, but They've made it through long closures before, and he is optimistic they'll be able to restart. However, he says the company needs to come to the table.
Well, I would love to see them coming saying, yes, we want to sell the place, or you know what, wait some time and we'll be back into operation as soon as we get our capital together. Anything. We're basically not knowing anything right now. So until they come forth and give us anything, there's nothing we can do to help.
Getting the company to the table is one place the union would like to see the government step in. He also hopes they'll keep the woodlands with the mill to maintain its value. For Stiles, another key takeaway is the broader impact a permanent shutdown could have on the economy.
It's not just in Northern Ontario where we have the economic benefit of this pulp mill. It goes right down all across the province, right? So if this mill closes, it's certainly going to impact families, community members here in Terrace Bay, and in Scriber, and in other communities nearby, but it's going to have economic impacts that are much more far-reaching, and we need the government to come to the table with us to actually find some solutions.
Stiles hopes her visit to Terrace Bay will draw more attention to the mill and keep pressure on the Ford government to find solutions as quickly as possible. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
Meanwhile, the Ford government has no plans to remove wood rights from the Terrace Bay pulp mill. That's according to the Minister of Natural Resources and Forestry, Graydon Smith. He addressed the fate of the mill during a visit to Thunder Bay.
So we know the wood supply is critical to the future operation of the mill, so there's nothing contemplated with any change right now on that. We obviously need to see how all this plays out, but we don't want to do anything that would stymie any future opportunity.
AV Terrace Bay is one of 8 partners in a nonprofit corporation that holds the Sustainable Forest License for the Kenogami Forest. That license includes a commitment to supply wood fiber to Terrace Bay Pulp Mill. The possibility that those wood rights could be separated from the mill was a major concern for union representatives following the announcement last month that the mill would be idled indefinitely. A lack of communication from the mill's parent company, Aditya Birla, was another big issue. Smith says his government has a reasonable relationship with the Fortune 500 company.
They have not given us a clear path to what their future operation looks like. They have not ruled out a sale. They, to my knowledge, have not ruled out any options for the future. I'd call that good news. But at the same time, there are workers right now that want to know what the future looks like, and a community that wants to know what the future looks like.
Smith says his government can't force Aditya Birla to the table, but he asked them to step up communications with the community, and notes his ministry is prepared to assist should Birla come forward with a plan for the mill. More than 9 years after an elderly woman died in a Fort Frances hospital, the former nurse who altered her medication records to steal morphine for her own addiction has been sentenced to 2 years in prison. 38-year-old Lindsay Coyle was originally charged with second-degree murder, but pleaded guilty in 2022 to criminal negligence causing death. The victim, 76-year-old Hermina Fletcher, died at La Vérendrye Hospital in January of 2015. Coyle admitted to stealing morphine for her own personal use and being high on the job. She was terminated a few weeks after Fletcher died and surrendered her nursing license a year later. Coyle's lawyer sought a 3-year suspended sentence. The Crown lawyer argued for 2 years behind bars. The judge agreed with the Crown's submission. In a statement, Fletcher's family says this prosecution has been a long and difficult journey. They appreciate that the judge recognized the gravity of Coyle's actions and the need to publicly denounce and deter such grave and irresponsible misconduct. 3 communities in the Northwest will lose passenger air service from Bearskin Airlines on May 11th. Dryden, Kenora, and Fort Frances received the grim news from Winnipeg-based Perimeter Air, which owns Bearskin. Dryden Mayor Jack Harrison says the loss will hit the community hard.
We'll be closing their scheduled air service beginning in May, so we'll lose our only scheduled air passenger service coming on the Dryden. That's disappointing news to begin with 2024.
In a statement, Perimeter Air blamed the pandemic for a major decline in flight demand and says passenger numbers in Dryden, Kenora, and Fort Frances haven't rebounded. Bearskin will continue to fly to and from Sioux Lookout, Red Lake, and Thunder Bay. Dryden officials plan to work with Kenora and Fort Frances to try and attract an alternate carrier. Harrison thinks Bearskin's rising prices may have impacted passenger numbers, which then led to this decision. But there were other factors after COVID.
we're seeing part of the economy hitting Dryden, and the effects of using Zoom, like we see now, probably less travel for government. But I think it's still very important for our city, especially as we want to grow and prosper. New businesses coming into Dryden who like to fly in and out to save the 4-hour drive to a major airport. So I think it's important for us to work hard to try to reinstate this service come spring.
The bearskin announcement was raised as a key issue by politicians from the three communities during the annual meeting of the Rural Ontario Municipal Association. The three communities affected by bearskin's routes cancellations are all in Northern Development Minister Greg Rickford's riding. This is what he had to say about the airline's decision.
Well, it certainly was a disappointment. This is a route that gets folks from either Fort Frances, Dryden, Kenora, pretty typically to Thunder Bay. I use it from time to time. It is quite handy. And I think, in fairness to Perimeter, Bearskin, they've done their best to try to serve a market that just hasn't recovered probably since COVID.
In a statement, Bearskin officials said over the past year, the service in Dryden, Fort Frances, and Kenora has averaged just 2 passengers per flight. As a result, those routes will be canceled on May 11th. Rickford says before the pandemic, around 80,000 people from his riding used the Winnipeg airport each year, and he thinks those numbers bode well for a lower-cost air carrier to fill the gap left by Bearskin. Rickford adds he'll do what he can at Queen's Park to help make it happen.
I think at this point, it's just far too early to try to understand what specific steps that we can take, but we are focusing on a strong economic development profile for our communities. We're seeing us in Fort Frances, Dryden, and Kenora coming back stronger than ever in some of the key industries, tourism, forestry, and the service sector, and hopefully that will attract traffic and no pun intended, but commercial airlines curiosity will be piqued, and I'll be there to try to understand how we can support that.
It's now time for a short break. We'll have a story about mental health funding for NAN when we return.
I've spoken to the parents of children lost to suicide and to the children of absent parents lost to the terrible cycle of addiction.
The Ford government is responding to the escalating mental health crisis in Anishinaabe Aski Nation communities. Minister Michael Tibolo and Greg Rickford recently announced more than $2 million in emergency funding to help First Nations respond to frequent suicides and other tragedies that have a profound impact on mental health. Jonathan Wilson has the details.
In the past 2 months, crisis teams with Nan Hope have responded to 17 tragedies in 12 communities, including the sudden deaths of a number of young adults and children as young as 12. That's according to officials with Kiiwetinoong Eabametoong, who operate the community-led mental health program.
There are so many crises that occur in our NAN communities. There has been a significant rise in the last 7 to 8 years. So the crisis response is essential.
Nan Hope is one of 4 programs receiving a total of $2.6 million in emergency funding from the province to address the severe mental health challenges faced in Anishinaabe communities. Indigenous Services Minister Greg Rickford was joined in Thunder Bay by Michael Tibolo, Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, to announce the funding.
I've seen firsthand what the mental health and addictions crisis have done to Indigenous communities across the province, particularly in the north. I've spoken to the parents of children lost to suicide and to the children of absent parents lost to the terrible cycle of addiction.
Tibolo emphasizes the need for government to listen to First Nations and follow their lead in working to improve mental health outcomes for First Nations people. He and Rickford both say there will be more funding announcements to come for medium and long-term solutions.
We didn't come to this table empty-handed, and our solutions won't be empty platitudes and endless discussions. We know that what is required is action, and we're taking action because the status quo is unacceptable to absolutely everyone.
It's a clarion call for NAN, organizations like KO, and other levels of government to continue to work together and to commit not just to the delivery of targeted mental health and addiction services, but to also create a platform for economic prosperity.
$1 million of the emergency funding is going directly to KO to increase surge capacity for the NAN Hope program. The rest is supporting various NAN mental health and crisis response programs in communities and in urban centers. Parkinson says while this funding is greatly needed to address immediate needs, ultimately, she says underlying conditions need to be addressed.
We're responding to are being reactive to crisis as opposed to being proactive, but this is just kind of what we're faced with today.
Jonathan Wilson, TBT News.
Grand Chief Elvin Fiddler is blasting the province for failing to consult with NAN before funding mental health services. His strong criticism came a few days after that funding pledge by Tibolo and Rickford. During their announcement, the 2 cabinet ministers spoke about the importance of listening to First Nations and following their lead. But Fiddler says, while there was some communication, there was no official meeting between NAN and the province prior to the announcement. He adds NAN invited the 2 ministers to a meeting on mental health just 2 weeks earlier, but they did not attend.
They're announcing money here and there, but it's not really part of an overall framework. We need to have a plan that is comprehensive and that is really based on the needs of our communities, and the way they've been operating last week and a half is just unacceptable. That we cannot operate in a way that that's at their convenience. Like, to have meetings that works for them and not for our communities, then they just throw money at us without any real thought behind it.
Fiddler says the province needs to work in a respectful way and partner with First Nations to develop programs that respond to community needs. He's still asking the province for an official meeting with all relevant ministers at the table. In a written statement, a spokesperson for Rickford's office committed to a meeting with NAN on mental health funding that, quote, supports mutual priorities and objectives that improve the health, social, and economic well-being of First Nations. 2 people have been charged in connection with a major drug bust in Fort Frances. Rainy River OPP and Treaty 3 police recently confiscated more than $500,000 worth of cash and drugs, including fentanyl, oxycodone, morphine, and cocaine, from an Osborne Street home. A 30-year-old from East York and a 33-year-old from Fort Frances have been arrested and were scheduled to make their appearance in court. Time now for another short break. And when we get back, we'll hear from the Ontario NDP leader again on this time on highway safety in the north.
We need the government to ensure that people in Northern Ontario have the same safe and reliable access to highways as people in the south.
Ontario opposition leader Marit Stiles is lending her voice to the chorus of those calling for improved highway safety in the north. The NDP leader held a news conference last month at a Thunder Bay truck inspection station to talk about the growing number of collisions and fatalities in this region. Lee Noonan reports.
Gathering her supporters at a Dawson Road inspection station, Ontario NDP leader Marit Stiles called on the Ford Conservatives to keep truck inspection stations operating 24/7. It's one among many highway safety measures her party wants to see implemented urgently.
We need the government to ensure that people in Northern Ontario have the same safe and reliable access to highways as people in the South. Northern Ontarians right now are paying with their lives. We cannot afford to wait.
Stiles believes northern highway safety is an issue that should also matter to people outside the region.
I've also been spending a bit of time down in areas like Brampton in southern Ontario, where a lot of the truckers live who are on our highways, and working with them to also raise their voices, because they want safe highways too, right? Like, it's their lives that are being lost as well.
Better training for truckers and tighter regulation of training schools are top of the list of changes she wants to see. The NDP also have two private members' bills before Queen's Park. One would make it illegal to cross a double yellow line, and the other would improve road maintenance and see northern highways plowed within 8 hours. Stiles acknowledges that majority governments will rarely pass an opposition-backed law, but she hopes this issue might be the exception.
First of all, this is a matter of life and death. The only thing stopping them from passing these bills is the political will to do so. And you know what? We'd be happy if they just take those ideas and run with them, right? We don't care who passes them, as long as we get those laws and those regulations changed.
After years of beating the drum on highway safety, Stiles says what's needed to move the issue forward is more public pressure.
People here need to contact Conservative MPPs in their communities. You know, if they have a representative, or even if they don't, to contact them, to reach out and say, we are fed up. Do the right thing.
Meanwhile, Stiles says her party, including Thunder Bay Superior North MPP Lise Vaugeois, will continue to raise the matter at Queen's Park. She's optimistic the government can be pushed to act. Lee Noonan, TBT News.
A marathon driver has been charged by Ontario Provincial Police after a dramatic single-vehicle crash. The car apparently lost control and plunged down a steep embankment. It happened last Sunday morning along Highway 17 near Coldwater Township. The badly damaged sedan wound up at the bottom of the rocky slope. OPP say the 43-year-old driver was lucky to suffer only minor injuries. He was taken to hospital and was later charged with careless driving. Lake of the Woods Brewing Company is planning an $8 million expansion in Kenora. The city has decided to chip in and support the project. Kenora City Council recently voted to contribute $375,000 to the construction of a Brewer's Village on Valley Drive. The new project will include a 20,000 square foot manufacturing and production facility, as well as a retail outlet and restaurant. Future developments on the 15-acre lot could also include hiking trails or community gardens.
At a time where it's really hard to court businesses to come to Kenora or anywhere, it's new and expanding. We will get taxes and sewer water rates from them. It will increase tourism in Kenora. I think it's checking all the boxes. I think it's a great project.
The city's Economic Development and Tourism Director says the project represents, quote, one of the largest employment creation projects in the last decade. It's expected to create 19 new full-time jobs and then at least 10 part-time jobs. And that's all for this edition of Northwest Newsweek. Join us next time for more of the top stories from across the region.